The Alpha King found a crying baby, then discovered the child carried his royal blood. Caelan Ashvorne had not planned to stop that night. The rain was heavy, the kind that soaks through leather and settles into bones, and he had been riding for hours through the borderland forest, with nothing but the sound of his horse's hooves and the distant rumble of thunder for company. He was the Alpha King of Silver Ridge, ruler of 5 wolf territories, commander of thousands, and yet on that particular night, he was simply a tired man who wanted to be alone. His advisors had begged him to bring guards. He had refused. After the diplomatic summit had collapsed into arguments and cold silence, he needed the forest road more than he needed protection. The trees didn't look at him with expectation. The rain didn't ask anything of him. And out here, far from the palace and its endless corridors of responsibility, he could almost forget that 3 years had passed since he lost his mate, and that the grief of it still had not fully released its hold on him. He was so deep in his own thoughts that he almost missed it. A sound, small and thin, cutting through the rain like a needle through cloth. He pulled his horse to a stop and listened. There it was again, a cry. Not an animal, something human, something very, very small. He dismounted before he had fully made the decision to do so, moving toward the great oak that stood just off the road, its thick roots spreading across the muddy ground like old fingers. And there, tucked between 2 of those roots as if placed with great care, was a bundle wrapped in a soaked woolen blanket. Caelan crouched down slowly. He pulled the wet cloth aside. A baby looked up at him. The infant could not have been older than 6 weeks. His face was red from crying, his small fists curled tight against his chest, and he was shivering in the cold night air. But what stopped Caelan, what made his breath catch in a way it hadn't in years, were the child's eyes. Silver, pure, clear silver, like moonlight caught in still water. Caelan had seen that color only once before in his life, in an old portrait hanging in the palace archives. It was a color tied to the oldest wolf bloodlines, one so rare it had not appeared in any known family for over 2 generations. His own wolf, which had been quiet and heavy inside him for 3 long years, stirred suddenly. Not in the way it did before a fight, in a way he didn't have a word for. Something like recognition, something like a door opening in a room he thought had been sealed forever. He wrapped the child in his riding cloak without another thought. The baby's crying slowed the moment warmth surrounded him, and he looked up at Caelan with those impossible silver eyes, as though he had been waiting, specifically, patiently, for this man to arrive. Caelan rode through the rest of the night without stopping. By morning, the palace was quietly alarmed. Staff moved carefully through the halls, exchanging glances, speaking in low voices. The Alpha King had returned from his journey, not with news of the summit, but with an infant wrapped in his cloak, and a look on his face that none of them had seen before. Calm, decided, and entirely closed to argument. His beta, a sharp and loyal man named Oren, met him at the palace doors and stared at the child for a long moment before finding words. "My king, where did he come from?" "The borderland road," Caelan said simply. "See that elder Marin is brought to the east wing. I want her to care for him." "And the orphanage?" "He stays here." That was the end of the conversation. Elder Marin, a wise and gentle she-wolf who had served the palace for 40 years, arrived within the hour. She bathed the baby, fed him warm milk, and wrapped him in soft royal linen. She asked no questions. She had served under Caelan's father, and had learned long ago when questions were welcome, and when they were not. The part that she noted privately, and shared with no one, was that Caelan came to the nursery 3 times that first day. He stood near the crib and said nothing. He only watched the child sleep, and each time he left, he walked a little lighter than when he had arrived. Meanwhile, Caelan had sent the blanket to the palace archivist with a single instruction: find out whose crest that is. The answer came back 2 weeks later, delivered by the archivist with nervous hands, and a voice that barely rose above a whisper. The crest belonged to House Vane. Caelan read the report twice, then set it down on his desk, and was still for a long time. House Vane, a name from a chapter of history that Silver Ridge's official records described carefully and briefly. A rival noble wolf clan, accused of plotting against the crown, removed by order of the previous Alpha King 12 years ago. Caelan had been 17 at the time. He remembered the announcement. He remembered his father's cold certainty. He remembered that he had said nothing, done nothing, stood in silence while an entire bloodline was declared finished. He had told himself he was too young to stop it. He had told himself, for years afterward, that his father must have had reasons. He had tried very hard not to think about it too clearly. Now a baby with vein blood had been left on a road he rarely traveled, wrapped in a crest that was supposed to be extinct, with eyes that stirred something deep and old in his wolf, and Caelan was done not thinking clearly. He called his most trusted general, a quiet and brilliant man named Soren, and gave him a mission with strict instructions for discretion. Find whoever placed that child beneath the oak. Find out if anyone from House Vane survived the purge. Find out what happened. Soren left the next morning with 3 men and no written orders. While Soren investigated, life in the East Wing continued in a way that surprised everyone who witnessed it, including Caelan himself. The baby, who had not yet been given a name, grew quickly in those weeks. He began to smile. He began to make small sounds of contentment when held, and louder sounds of protest when set down. Elder Marin adored him completely. The kitchen staff left small gifts outside the nursery door. Even Oren, who had been skeptical from the start, was caught one afternoon making faces at the child through the doorway. And Caelan came every day. He didn't make a ceremony of it. He would simply arrive in the late evening, after the business of ruling was finished, and sit near the crib. Sometimes Elder Marin would place the baby in his arms, and Caelan would hold him with the careful stiffness of a man not accustomed to such things. But he would not give him back until the child fell asleep. He had not yet let himself ask the question forming quietly in the back of his mind. He was waiting for Soren to return first. Soren returned on a gray Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after he had left. He closed the door to Caelan's private study, sat across from the king, and spoke for a long time without interruption. One daughter of House Vane had survived the purge. Her name was Seraphine. She had been 15 years old when the soldiers came for her family, and had escaped into the Eastern Territories, where she rebuilt herself slowly and quietly under a false name. She had lived carefully for years, learning the trades of common wolf families, keeping no record of her true identity, trusting almost no one. 4 years ago, she had met a man. He had called himself Rowan, a name with no last name attached, which she had not questioned, because she herself was living without one. He was kind and calm and careful with her, in the way that mattered. They had fallen in love in the honest, unhurried way that people do when they are both carrying things they cannot say out loud. He had disappeared 8 months ago. No word, no explanation. Seraphine had later heard rumors, secondhand, that the man she knew as Rowan had been found dead in another territory. An accident, the story said. She had not been able to verify it. She had been 6 weeks from giving birth. Then enemies had found her. Old enemies. Hunters paid by someone who wanted the vein line permanently and completely gone. She had run, and when she could no longer run, and the forest had closed in around her, she had made a choice. She had placed her newborn son beneath the roots of the great oak on the borderland road. She had wrapped him in the only thing she had with her that carried any truth, the old Vane family blanket, the one her mother had given her the night of the purge, the one she had carried for 12 years because it was the only piece of her real name she had left. She had chosen that specific road deliberately, because it was the one road she knew the Alpha King sometimes traveled alone. She had been gambling, desperately, with everything she had, that Caelan Ashvorne was not his father. When Caelan heard this, he was quiet for a very long time. Then he asked one more question. What was the man's full name? The one she called Rowan? Soren met his eyes. That is the part I came back to tell you in person, my king. The man Seraphine had loved, who had traveled east 4 years ago, who had given her a false first name and kept his last name hidden, was Prince Edric Ashvorne, Caelan's younger brother, the prince who had died in a hunting accident. The prince whose coffin Caelan had stood beside in the palace courtyard on a cold morning 3.5 years ago, not yet knowing that the coffin was empty, that the death had been staged, that Edric had run from the weight of royalty and the damage of their father's legacy, and had chosen a quiet life somewhere no one knew his name. He had not made it. He had been found, by the same enemies hunting Seraphine, most likely, and this time there had been no surviving. The child in the nursery was Edric's son, Seraphine's son, by blood, by lineage, and by every law of the Wolf Kingdoms, a prince of Silver Ridge. Caelan did not send soldiers to find Seraphine. He went himself. He rode east with only 2 guards, no royal banners, no announcement. It took 4 days to find her. She was good at hiding, and she had reason to be. When they finally located the safe house where a small network of loyal wolves had been sheltering her, she came to the door with a blade in her hand and eyes that had clearly not slept properly in weeks. She looked at Caelan for a long moment. He looked back at her. He had expected someone broken. What he found was someone who had survived too much to have anything left to lose, which made her far more dangerous than broken. "You came alone," she said. "2 guards," he answered honestly. "I left the army at home." "Why?" "Because you didn't send your son to me as a weapon," he said. "You sent him to me as a hope. I wanted to honor that." She didn't lower the blade immediately. He didn't ask her to. He told her everything. About finding the child. About the blood bond test he had ordered. The ancient wolf ritual that confirmed lineage, and what it had revealed. About Edric. About the empty coffin, and what it meant that her son carried royal blood in his veins. He told her, also, about what his father had done to her family, and that he was sorry. Not in the easy way people apologize for things they did not personally do, but in the harder way, the way that includes the guilt of silence and the weight of standing still, when standing still had consequences. Seraphine listened to all of it without speaking. When he finished, she sat down on the step of the doorway and pressed her hands over her face. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry. But she stayed that way for a long time, and Caelan waited without rushing her. Finally she looked up. "My son is safe?" "He has been safe since the night I found him," Caelan said. "He has been eating well and sleeping well, and driving Elder Marin to complete happiness. He has your eyes." Something shifted in her face at that. Just slightly. Just enough. "I want to see him," she said. "I know," said Caelan. "That's why I'm here." They returned to Silver Ridge 6 days later. The announcement that followed was careful and precise and completely honest, which made it the most unusual royal announcement in living memory. Caelan stood before his council and told them that the child found on the Borderland Road was the son of Prince Edric Ashvorne and Seraphine of House Vane, that the Vane purge had been an injustice carried out under a false accusation, and that House Vane would be formally and publicly restored to its rightful standing. The council was not happy. Several noble houses were not happy. Caelan listened to all of their objections with patience, and then informed them, quietly, that the matter was decided. The boy was named Edric Rowan Ashvorne, in memory of his father. He was declared the king's heir, since Caelan had no children of his own. Within the year he was walking. Within 2 years, he was running down palace corridors and laughing at volumes that could be heard from 3 rooms away. Seraphine stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go. Caelan made sure she understood that she had choices, that the palace was not a gilded cage, that she owed him nothing. She stayed because Silver Ridge was her son's home, and because, slowly, over months of shared meals and long evenings and conversations that started about the kingdom and ended somewhere more personal, she found that she did not want to leave. Caelan did not rush anything. He had learned, from loss, that the things worth having are the things you make room for carefully. What grew between them was not dramatic. It was not the kind of love that arrives like lightning. It was the kind that comes in quietly, in trust built slowly, in grief shared honestly, in 2 people who had both lost so much choosing, without ceremony, to face forward together. He had ridden out that night looking for silence. What he found instead was a silver-eyed child who carried his brother's blood, a woman who had bet everything on his goodness, and the long, patient work of becoming someone worthy of both.